Team, a day doesn't go by where the topic of AI doesn't actually come up in conversation about life or about professional sales. Of course, everybody's heard of ChatGPT by now. Most of you are probably using it in some capacity. And in the interest of being authentic, I'm going to tell you that most of the questions for today's podcast came when I asked ChatGPT what I should ask an AI expert in a podcast. ChatGPT posted most of the questions I used. But what we're going to be doing on the Selling Well is we're going to start to uncover this topic of AI and try and stay current on the topic of AI because it's going to affect everything we do moving forward. Whether it's prospecting, even client segmentation, forecasting, deal progression, getting rid of repetitive tasks, AI is going to touch on a lot of different things in professional sales in the coming year. So we're going to try and keep you well informed about what's happening. And by the way, that's why we're so happy about today's podcast, because today we're going to be talking with Usman Sheikh, who is the founder and CEO of XIQ. And XIQ is a AI-powered sales and marketing platform for the entire customer life cycle. We're going to talk about a couple of really important things in today's podcast. First of all, Usman's got a great background. He spent, more than 13 years with SAP in product leadership roles. He obviously really understands the B2B sale at the highest level, where you're dealing with multiple buyers, multiple decision makers. And he and I get alignment on a couple of things. The top salespeople do two things really well. They understand the clients they're selling into and how to help those clients generate a business case for whatever solution they're providing. And secondly, they manage the increasingly complex relationship map. Those are two things that top salespeople do really well. The way Usman came at this solution for XIQ, he said, listen, he saw what some of the top reps in some of the best sales organizations were doing, like SAP. He wanted to figure out, how do you replicate that or make it easier for other reps to be doing the same things along those same two topics, frankly. Building the business cases and understand the clients that you're selling into, what's current, what's going on. And then secondly, how do you really start to work the relationship map and understand who you're selling to? We're going to get into that in detail today, but really interesting stuff where Usman's platform, XIQ, can do those things. He can give you a very quick size up on the clients you're selling into, in many cases, building a SWOT analysis for their business and for your offering into their business, but find out the trends in the industry and the marketplace, very, very current. And then they can actually give you a size up on some behavioral science associated with the key buyers. So they're going to go out and try and build almost a screen scrape of a disc profile for some of the buyers that you're going to be selling into, understand the psychometrics, what's important to them. So you have a better chance of actually building those relationships. And I think he uses a term, AI is increasing the human component of sales, which is actually a great way of going at it. It's really clear, team, that Usman's got real depth in the B2B selling space at the highest level, most complex sales. He's also very deep in AI. I learned a lot today, including some of the basics. What is the difference between predictive analysis and generative analysis in AI? What of the tools that are out there, how big is the actual corpus or the database that they're going to? When does it start and stop? And then what is LLM or large language models? What are those? So let's learn some of the basics about AI and start to think about how we apply it to different elements of selling, whether it's customer segmentation, whether it's pricing, whether it's sales development, whether it's forecasting. All of these things are things we can consider with today's podcast. It's a great conversation with Usman. I really enjoyed meeting him, as I do with all the guests. This is the joy of this podcast. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast. Here's Usman Sheikh. Usman, welcome to the Selling Well podcast. I'm delighted to have you on the show today, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Mark. Great to be here with you.
Well, the topic today is such an interesting one, Usman, and I'm quite sure we're going to have a number of follow-on conversations, but the topic of AI in life is just so pervasive right now. And then as it pertains to professional sales, extremely interesting to many of us. And we know this is changing very quickly, and you're on the front end of many of these things. But one of the questions we love at the beginning, Usman, I know you've got a magnificent background in sales. Tell us a little bit about your journey in professional sales.
Yeah, so I prior to starting XIQ, which is an AI-powered B2B sales and marketing platform, I was at SAP. And I spent about 13 and a half years at SAP, had the opportunity of working with some of the best salespeople around the world. And and building product for them. I built enterprise products for them, rolled those products out into the field, had a great customer-facing experience in Asia Pacific, in Singapore, which is where I first traveled to and kind of worked over there for 2.5 years. Then I went to headquarters in Waldorf, Germany, and kind of faced with the entire EMEA, Europe, Middle East, Africa client base. And then eventually came to Palo Alto and kind of handled North America, Latin America, American clients, introducing them products, and introducing innovation that SAP was bringing to market. And a couple of things I noted in there, what were some of the best practices of the sales guys, right? And kind of an old cliche, but, 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them in that order, right? The top sales guys were probably the most unassuming people. They could be flies on the wall, but they were the ones that were closing the 100 million plus euro deals for SAP. So what were they doing, right? This was where they had big networks of people that they could call up, the partners at Accenture, the people at HP, the PwC guys, and get all sorts of insights and information. They really knew the organization they were selling to very, very well. And they had networks of people, supporters. They were very likable people, extremely knowledgeable. And they were like kind of thought leaders and the go-to person when you wanted to find out anything that was going on in the industry. They were partners. But the rest, but these were only about the 5% top performers in an organization. The rest of the 95% were struggling with this. So the idea of XIQ was born, which was that how can we actually help the rest of the 95% get the value and the wisdom of these top 5% of the performance? And we took some of, exactly those things, right? They listen, they know their audience extremely well. They're well aware of their industry. They're extremely well equipped. And they can pretty much handle all the questions. They're the go-to guys. And we said, look, can we codify it into a platform? And at this point, about 5-6 years ago, I was leaving SAP. And, I decided that, AI was just very much in its infancy. Mobile was there and user experience. So we kind of started building a platform around these three. And XIQ was one, which I'm really excited to tell you about as we go through the call.
So when we start to think of the problem at hand, Usman, who wouldn't want to try and replicate the top 5% of sales performers? And by the way, I can validate with some personal experience that SAP would have had some of the top salespeople in the world because of the size and scale of the software and the consulting deals that they did. They are some of the largest transaction. Enterprise software is a big deal in large corporates. So trying to replicate the results of the top 5%, obviously this amazing call to action. But before we jump down into your specific solution for doing that, let's ground our listeners in terms of some baseline understandings of a few things. Let's talk about the definition of AI today. I've never seen a product gain as much momentum as ChatGPT. I've never been in so many meetings where somebody's proactively bringing up the name of that product. In the last year, it's been unbelievable to me, the last 8 months. But most people would think of AI today, they think of ChatGPT, but let's talk a little bit about the definition of AI.
Yeah, great question. So AI is essentially the ability to forecast and predict patterns, right? So it's trained. There's machine learning algorithms that are trained around patterns. These could be language patterns. These could be robotic automation patterns, and so on. So these patterns are essentially what AI has been doing. we at XIQ were working in essentially picking up public data, analyzing it, and feeding it into the pattern of being able to predict a personality using the DISC personality model, right? And with ChatGPT, and we were doing this 4 years before ChatGPT was around. But what ChatGPT did is it went to the next level, and it is a generative AI model. It has machine learning capabilities, but it is also linked to a large language model. And what it does is it allows you to start having this conversation, this back and forth with that. So there are 2 or 3 elements to this AI. One, it has to have a reference point or a database or a corpus, as we call it. In the case of ChatGPT, that corpus is pretty much the entire internet, all the way up to September 2021. In the case of XIQ, we have all business company related information up to the minute. Second thing is, it has to have some kind of pattern recognition capabilities, machine learning capabilities, so it continuously gets smarter to be able to forecast the next step. And in the case of ChatGPT, it has this large language model, which is absolutely brilliant because it can actually write out things for you. It can conversate, it can speak to you, it can talk to you, you can have a conversation with it. So it becomes conversational. So today, we've gone from just plain AI being able to predict the monotonous kind of patterns and kind of forecast the next version to generative AI, where it starts generating the next level of discussions and kind of starts feeding you information, right? And ChatGPT is great because, as you said, over the last 6 months, it's become a household name, right? And what it's also done for us, a company like XIQ, which we've incorporated ChatGPT, but what it's done for us is that it has taken the taboo of AI out of the discussion, right? It has been very, kind of household. Everybody knows it. It's reduced the barriers that people had around and the skepticism that existed around AI. Hopefully that helps answer the question.
Well, it does. And I really love the delineation, Usman, going between predictive AI and then generative AI. So this is where you start to think in professional sales. If we start to run through the different topics we could consider, whether it's client segmentation, whether it's pricing, whether it's prospecting, whether it's forecasting, there's lead scoring, like the potential applications here become limitless. And with all of the other 5,000 different technologies enabling the sales stack today and growing exponentially, I think one of the things that's so important for all of us, we actually almost need AI to be able to navigate those ones, unless we're talking to Tony Hughes and Justin Michael, who wrote Tech Powered Sales. They've both been on the show, by the way. They're both great guys. But I think one of the things that's kind of interesting is let's start to think about, that initial application of this. And so you started with this core problem of, hey, how do I replicate what the best salespeople do? And you also made a point of saying, hey, these are not natural extroverts all the time. These are problem solvers who likely know as much about the client's business in many cases as their own business. They're very much client focused and focused on driving desired business outcomes for the client and not pitching a product. So already we've got some alignment. The listeners on the Selling Well will know we're going to love you for saying that. But let's talk about, how do we do that? How do we replicate our top 5% and try and enable the next segment down to elevate to that level of performance?
Yeah, exactly. So, the core of what these successful salespeople do is they're about people relationships, right? So it's about building that relationship. And that's kind of like the X code, if you may, right? Like how do you decipher what is these human relationships. So when I was kind of whiteboarding out XIQ, I had all this, like, I need to be able to answer what the company's, what is the news related to company? How are its financials doing? What are its C-level executives thinking? What is the sentiment around those? So I had all these peripheral things. But what I was missing at the initial whiteboarding sessions was the person. right? And so I put it on a board, and a friend of mine came in and he looked at it and he said, this is all great, but what you're missing, the missing ingredient is the person. And that suddenly lit up the light bulb, right? How do can it decipher the human relationship code? And we turned around and looked at behavioral science, and there it was. There's methodologies out there that are very, very well crafted and engineered to help us understand other people. And these are called psychometrics, right? And this is the ability of understanding how people think, the heuristics of how people make decisions. And so we turned around and we further looked, and we discovered that there's, of course, Myers-Briggs is probably the most well-known one. But another very popular one, which was, I believe, used at SAP as well, was the DISC methodology. This stands for dominant, influencing, steady, and conscientious. These are behavioral traits that all humans have in some degree, right? And so from there, they had built a very nice, kind of a model, publicly available model, by the way, that you could use to be able to, traditionally you took tests to answer questions. In the case of XI, and those tests were about being able to respond to words that were embedded in those questions, right? And situations that were embedded in those questions. And then, you would be able to formulate what kind of personality it is. And then you usually give career advice. So we made a little few twists. So first of all, instead of a test, we said, we're going to go and pick up digital breadcrumbs. My experience at SAP in building the SAP Eco Hub, the online store, was that people are leaving a lot of digital breadcrumbs. And I'm going back, dialing the clock back to 2008 at that point, right?
Wow.
And now in 2023. So you can imagine the amount of breadcrumbs we leave in the public domain. Second thing was that, so we pick up these breadcrumbs, and then we can analyze them using the same algorithms they had for the tests, but we can do that in under 3 seconds. And now we have over 2 billion people that are leaving digital breadcrumbs that we can query and put a DISC personality with a fairly high degree of accuracy. So that was a very, very important ingredient in kind of replicating the best practices of the salesperson, was to be able to understand that human dimension. Now that we had that human dimension, and it was, how do we build the relationships? Well, we have human dimension for person A, we have human dimension for person B. What is the alignment between these human dimensions? That becomes somewhat easier once you have cracked that bigger code, which is like, who are these people, right? Then finding the affinity, so to speak, between those becomes a lot easier. And therein starts, how do we build this relationship, and then how can we pan this relationship across the rest of the 95%, right?
So we'll go back, we'll touch on a couple of things here. And one of the reasons you are here today is another great guest on the show, Alice Hyman, whose dad was from Miller Hyman.
Exactly.
You're touching on, at the core, even for an enterprise sales deal, probably the two most important things is understanding the business case, return on investment, the opportunity, in terms of the solution. There's got to be a viable business case. And then the second piece is, who are the somewhere between 6, 8, 10 people who actually really influence that deal? What's important to them? What's most important to them? How do they feel about us? What's their degree of influence? With the 1,000 sales books that have been written since strategic selling, a good portion of them take 60% of strategic selling, which is all about playing with the buyers, the buyer personas and all the rest of it, because that's so foundational. And it sounds like what you focused in on was saying, if we could automate and expedite that process of understanding the buyers involved based on their personality profiles and their psychometrics and the heuristics, we can now speak to them in a language that matters to them, so that this might resonate, whether we're starting a deal or in the middle of a deal, or in fact trying to close a deal. So that speeds up this process of trying to get to know the buyer. Yep, got it. What about the other element of if I'm trying to understand that company and the business case? You came from SAP, you spent years and years there. They had a group called value engineering, and value engineering was used to actually assess the strategic positioning of a particular prospect and understand how they're performing against their peers, and where there were gaps, then we'd go in and talk to that client about getting up to or surpassing the market KPI for anything. So we had a reason for that conversation. And the best salespeople could do that. They could start a sales cycle with that. How does the tool you're working with today, the company you've founded, do you help with that aspect of it as well, Usman?
Absolutely. So XIQ, as I was saying, when I was whiteboarding, it was those elements that I was putting on the whiteboard. And the person element was kind of not, I was like the kind of the thing that kind of glued it all together, that yes, knowing the financials of the company, knowing the sales triggers, knowing the competitive landscape, knowing what people are, what the executives and the companies putting out on social media, on video channels, understanding the sentiment, comparing it across the industry was paramount. And then, the initial idea was that people would take all these different data points and being able to conduct SWOT analysis and identify pain points. Well, we'll come to that in just a second, because now we've automated that process as well. Mm. So this, so it's good that I'm a people person and I have high likability with you, and I have developed alignment, but I need to be able to provide that value added to the relationship. And in the B2B sales relationship, it's two things. It's the business value that I can deliver, or my product or service can deliver, but it's also, more importantly, the individual value that I can deliver for you, one of the 12.5, as Gartner says, buyers in the buyer committee, right? Mm. So it's being able to press two buttons. One, of course, I come to you, Mark, and I say, this is something that's going to really, really help your business. Great, check mark. But, if I really want to get things moving, I want to, build the business case for you, the value case for you as an individual as well. So what we did is we've aggregated, XIQ has aggregated the entire internet. We use natural language processing and we've written our own AI-based algorithms to take news about companies and then categorize it into 21 different types of news: mergers and acquisitions, litigations, new product introductions, new clients, impact of COVID-19, and it goes on and on, critical things. So you can, as a seller, you can come in as a value engineer, you can come in, apply a filter, and then cut the signal to noise ratio and focus in on those aspects of news that are going to be important to your industry and to your client base. So that's one. Financials are present. That helps you do that. Now, all of this were ingredients we had in place. And this year, what we've started to do is connect the dots, right? So how are we connecting the dots? Two ways. One, the buying committee. So within the buying committee in XIQ, at a press of a button, you can start following people and build a buyer group. And within the buyer group, it automatically places you into three categories. First category is that of a doer. And these doers are people that are fast movers. They like to get things done. They're decision makers. They might step on people's toes, right? But they will get things done. Second are coaches, right? We've been with, people that will guide you through the organization, that will show you the path, but will not necessarily take sides, right? They will like you, but not take sides. And then there are the blockers, right? And these are not necessarily naysayers. People kind of say a lot of people that block are naysayers. Not necessarily naysayers. They're just people that ask a lot of questions. They're naturally skeptic about things. They don't take things for face value. And when they start asking a lot of these difficult questions, what happens is that the rest of the organization, they start, the morale goes down, people start questioning themselves, and your deal starts unraveling. Mm-hmm. Most people tend to show up a little bit later in the funnel, right? So they show up in the funnel, and you've worked really, really hard. So XIQ, first thing it does, by being able to map these individuals out, you can now see the kind of the topography of your buying committee. from a psychological perspective, from a behavioral perspective, and you can preempt that. Now, second part is, now that I know the topography, I need to be able to convince them of the business value, right? So what we did is we had all the ingredients coming into XIQ, which were what is happening within the company, what is the executive suite, what are they talking about, what are their financials. We applied generative AI to that, and voila, in seconds we can come up with the SWOT analysis, right? Strength, weakness, opportunity, threats of a company. Now, you've been in B2B sales, you've done value engineering, you know companies like SAP, you know the importance of SWOT analysis, right? Every good seller must know a SWOT analysis. Yet, how difficult is it to do a SWOT analysis? I have to go through reams of data to do research to put this together. Who has the time to do it, right? Who has access to those analyst reports and then news and then sentiments and so on? There's so much going on. So by the time you get a properly defined SWOT analysis at thousands of dollars, it's already outdated. Take the example of the Silicon Valley Bank, right? If you were to get a SWOT analysis today, the bank doesn't even exist, right?
Would have looked a little different 2 months ago.
Fast forward to XIQ, you press a button and there's up to the minute SWOT analysis done, right? Now, the other beautiful thing is that we've started using ChatGPT to start writing these outreach, emails. We can actually question and say, identify the key pain points of SAP, HANA or Fiori, and then to that map out what would be the best way XIQ's platform would be able to support SAP. Yeah. And now it has the ingredients to go in there, pull that information, and under 10 seconds, you have this uniquely crafted email for Mark, right? And then another one for Ross, and another one for Usman, right? Each one conveying the same message, but in a tone and at an emotional level and an emotional voice that resonates with each one of you. And that's just a game changer, right?
So it's hard to debate that any of that is of huge value. And it's also, by the way, there's nothing about the process you're talking about, Usman, that's new. Anybody who's done big deals has had to do this, right? It's just the amount of time it took, first of all, to get there. The second piece would be, I think a lot of us would have been trying to do the psychometrics and the assessment of the different buyers through a gut feel, where we weren't logically putting them through, a DISC profile or Myers-Briggs. We would just use platitudes about Usman's a real driver. This is what Usman wants, but we weren't using any discipline because we couldn't. We're not that advanced in terms of knowing those things. I think what's quite interesting about what AI can help us with today is, first of all, it's A, the speed, critically important. B, the output from these things is actually going to help me qualify who I'm going to chase in the first place. So, because I might start to get very, very specific about, that ideal customer profile for us and start to change decisions. So I'm not spraying and praying, big problem for most companies. And then the last thing I would say is this brings a level of sophistication down to younger, more entry-level sales professionals who don't yet have that level of business acumen or understand what they're looking for when they do spend some time doing research. I think we have other challenges. We have to raise their level of business acumen, and we have to coach them properly and train them properly. But I think there's three big things that are really important. And the first one is going to be a game changer in sales, because the big problem in sales today, in my view, isn't filling the top of the funnel. It's our conversion rates going down, keep getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And so if I can get better, go after fewer things, have a higher close ratio, spend less money on pursuits that I don't win, so on and so forth, I think that starts to have a real critical impact on a lot of companies out there.
Fully agree. We look at it in three dimensions. Business acumen, absolutely correct. And as I was explaining in my previous response, that's one of the things we build. Second is mindful engagement, right? So much unthought of kind of shoot from the hip, cookie cutter approach that's out there. This is why sales is getting a bad rap, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but I certainly get every day about 10 to 15 emails from sales reps like, hey, did you read my email from 2 weeks ago? It's like, oh my God, and that's like right there. It's like click, delete. I don't want to ever to you, right? And there's so much of that going on. So the mindful engagement, and my expectation today, because in my B2C kind of persona, I get a lot of personalization when I go to order my pizza. They already know what ingredients I'm having, right? So I expect that today, and I expect that of salespeople. The only reason I'm going to kind of respect them and listen to them is if they can amaze me with the fact that they've done research to know, and they've bothered, forget the amazement part, they've bothered to do the research to get to know me a little bit, right? To earn the right to be able to sell to me, to come through my door, because you're not a stranger, you're somebody that I have gotten to know, or you know me. And that's like table stakes, right? You need to do that to get in the door. And the last piece is data-driven decision-making, right? Today, so much data in the sales process that's very, very important. And I'll say there's a fourth ingredient that all of this, when you kind of AI automate it and kind of shrink the timeline, add the beefiness to this, with in the intelligence to this, it's the singularity of the process. A term that you are probably familiar with is the customer engagement lifecycle, right? And so it's about the customer. It's about customer centricity. And, if you look at the fragmented, you talked about 11,000 sales solutions, right? That's a disaster in my first place. Mark, did you know that in 2017 already, Gartner predicted that the technology budget of the CMO is larger than that of the CIO of a company? That's a very huge problem statement, right? Because I hired a chief marketing officer, not a chief marketing technology officer, right? Second, very alarming statistic to this is that now this person is managing the average 16 different solutions that are involved in that fragmented sales customer engagement lifecycle process.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Right. And so my budget that should be spent on going and running programs, in events, in nurturing my pipeline is now being diverted towards very, very expensive integrations. And as we both know, that those integrations lock you in time, meaning that if you wanted to upgrade.
You knew something about that at SAP, Usman. By the way, don't be on the other side of the fence now, okay? Nobody could ever get out of an SAP implementation, even if they wanted to. So that served you very well for 15 years of your career. Let's not look at it the bad way now.
Exactly. But it locks you in, but it retards innovation, right? So what we need to be able to do is free these guys up and take them away from, and the last thing is, these companies are invested millions of dollars in these technologies, but they have invested in an infrastructure that takes your steam engine train and your diesel engine train and runs on that. And we are in the electronic bullet train era. And the bullet train is not going to be able to run on the train tracks that are established for, trains that cannot exceed 100 miles per hour. And these things run at 220 miles per hour, right? Yep. So you need to be able to cut away. And then lastly, very, very important point over here, the rate of innovation as a result of AI, right? It's exponential. What that means is the gap it creates between companies that are jumping on the bandwagon, early adopters to this, versus those companies that are still using these legacy fragmented systems that are still struggling to talk to each other and that are locked back in time. The rate of change is going to be significant, right?
On that point, you're right. So the rate of change is coming rapidly. Let's get away from a product discussion for a second, but you're clearly an expert on AI. What are your sources of information, Usman, for staying current? We've got a lot of CEOs listening to this who want to elevate their level of acumen with AI, and they're hearing so much from so many different areas. How did they stay a little bit current or improve their level of acumen with AI?
Yeah, so I'll do a shameless plug for something that we do. So we've part of our platform is a what we call the workbench. A really creative name. But what the workbench does is it uses AI algorithms to curate content. And we can put in topics like generative AI and sales and marketing, right? And it will find all the articles on generative AI and sales and marketing. And then we take it and we publish it in as 3 newsletters a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I read those newsletters, right? I religiously read those letters because there's 6 stories in there that have been curated to give me the latest and greatest on that. And we do this for a number of clients. We have one on autonomous autos, like what is happening in the world of, we have one on Internet of Technologies, IoT. We have one on AI, self-driving cars, IoT, and then we have 2 on sales and marketing technologies. So I read those, and it's very quick reading, and it just kind of summarizes everything. And by the way, why do we do this? Because we sell that technology. That's a great tactic of getting your clients engaged, because now you're shifting gears from, you remember we talked about information being partner, adding value added. You're shifting away from selling to providing them information. And these digests, as we call them, and you can go to our website, xiqinc.com, and there's a section in there for digest, and you can subscribe for free to the AI digest. And 3 times a week in your inbox, you will get this feed. That's what I do. I stay up to that because the rate of change of what's happening in this, it's not getting published in books anymore.
So team, I would do that, by the way. I would actually go down and download that newsletter to stay current. Just on a fun note here, one of the things I did do prior to, just as an example, prepping for today's podcast, was I didn't prepare my normal questions for today. I gave myself 5 minutes before we started this podcast. I went to ChatGPT and I asked for great podcast questions for somebody who's an expert in AI.
Yeah.
And I got a list of, now, frankly, I didn't get to all of them, but I got a list in 7 seconds or 4 seconds of 22 spectacular questions that not only will I use for this podcast, but I'll actually end up using them for lots of other podcasts on AI, because this topic's never going to stop. One of the things, Usman, that we do with this podcast, we're really just trying to educate, the team out there on, and this topic is such a relevant, important topic. I have to say that your energy enthusiasm for this topic is absolutely contagious.
Thank you.
And we absolutely have alignment in terms of, if you want the right to sell anything, you absolutely have to be adding value all of the time to your clients and prospects. And it seems like you found a way of speeding up that process. If after today's podcast, somebody wants to learn more about you or XIQ, how do they do so? What's the easiest way to do that?
Yeah, so I would say LinkedIn is a great source because we are constantly, I post a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. Usman, USMAN, Sheikh. I'm sure you'll be typing
It'll
it
be
up.
in the show notes, gang.
Show notes. So you can go and look me up on LinkedIn. Follow me. I love being followed, or just connect with me. And then XIQ Inc. XIQ Inc. on LinkedIn. Blue and green and white logo. Follow that. A lot of great information. These newsletters or digests, as we call them, xiqinc.com, xiqinc.com. That's our website. You can go and subscribe to these. Another great source of staying on top of what's happening with XIQ and what we're doing.
Fantastic. So Usman, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for joining the Selling Well podcast. What a delight to get a chance to meet you, and really appreciate the value you've offered our team today.
Mark, it's great to see a fellow SAP alum and people that we know. And the pleasure that gets me excited about life is talking to people who understand the dimensionality of what we're talking about and the opportunity that this presents. Because I think we are at a point, an inflection point, right? And it is really our responsibility to kind of make the world aware that the direction that we've been going down has significantly changed, right? And so let me say thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity, and yourself what you're doing in kind of reshaping the transformational aspect of what's happening in B2B sales and marketing. It's absolutely important. And it's I think from our perspective, I almost see this as a fiduciary responsibility that we may have, that we go and invest in changing the mindsets that are out there.
Oh, what a great summary. Well, first of all, thank you for those kind comments, Usman. And it's been such a pleasure meeting you. This won't be the last time we talk for sure. So thank you again. And team, thank you for listening to the Selling Well podcast. As everybody knows, the reason we do this is to try and elevate the performance and professionalism of B2B sales, and in doing so, improve the lives of professional salespeople. And we really hope today's podcast has moved us forward in that direction. But we want to hear from you. So if you enjoyed the podcast today, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast and tell your friends. And if there's something that we can do differently with these podcasts to make them even more valuable to you, please let us know. We love constructive criticism. And you can send your comments to markcox@inthefunnel.com. That's my personal email, and I respond to every comment we get. And again, don't pull your punches. We love constructive criticism, and we'll thank you for it. We'll see everybody next time on the Selling Well podcast.